I do want to kind of keep on LAG and Minnesota. I think that there are a few teams that we can kind of group together here because I'm not entirely sure what to make of them as we get out of this first 2 weeks. I have four teams that are just kind of weird right now: Miami, Vancouver, LAG, and Minnesota. For different reasons. Obviously, LAG is at the bottom with an 0-4 record, and then Minnesota is at 2-2. Vancouver and Miami both at 1-3. But I'm not entirely sure what to make of these four teams because LAG they're owned for sure, but as you just mentioned, they gave LAT a pretty good run, had very competitive hard points that could have gone either way. They lose game fives to both Minnesota and Optic, and they lose a series to Carolina, who we've talked about is 4-0 and is looking incredibly good at this point in the season. And then you look at Minnesota, they started 2-0, like you mentioned, they win those game fives. And then they come in this week, they play C9 and they play LAT. They lose in 4 games to both of those teams. Vancouver, they've only played teams that are either 3-1 or 4-0 currently, and Miami has lost 3 consecutive game fives. So I'm not entirely sure if they're good teams, if they're bad teams, if they're just somewhere in the middle. But what do you make of this kind of? I think it's more of like a logjam in the middle. I guess we always kind of get this, but would you agree that these four teams in particular are kind of hard to place at this current point in time?
Sure. I mean, that's just the thing as we're going through all of these teams, really, like it's 4 online matches that we're judging these teams off of and trying to draw conclusions for. So it's still incredibly early on, and even though we've talked about FaZe a great deal, but just for lack of a better example, like, FaZe is a team where we're talking about right now them struggling and being 1-3, but at the end of the day, like that narrative could be just completely flipped later on in the season, and multiple people probably expect that to be the case, right? So, I think that's a fair assessment for all of these teams. Yeah, they're not getting off to, and in some cases, they're not getting off to the start some of them may have hoped, and it's how you're able to respond to that adversity, and what you're able to do to change things around a little bit, regardless of what your specific situation is. But I think that's just like some of these teams that we didn't necessarily consider as SS tier heading into the season. It's just gonna take some time, and you want to see more out of all of these teams. But those teams in the middle of the pack, in particular, it's like they're that's why it's the middle of the pack, for lack of a better term, right? Like, you expect them to trade blows. They're gonna beat Team A sometimes, but they're gonna lose the Team B other times, and it's gonna be a tussle and tug of war in terms of uh, who's able to actually come out on top. And that's what we kind of talked about that a lot last year on the show, in terms of um, like the battle for fifth place, where
Mm-hmm.
at points it looked like Vegas Legion might have a claim to that, and then at other points that Vegas started struggling and went to some other teams and whatnot. So, um, yeah, I mean, everybody's gonna be in different situations, and end of the day, you know it's still very early on. But I mean, there's definitely been some signs of life from all of these teams in my eyes. Like, just looking Gentlemates, they literally early on, I didn't look at the numbers for these most recent matches, but I just know the first set of matches I had highlighted Lins and being like, he was showing up and slaying well early on, and that was a good sign for this potential NYSL reunion roster of plus Lins minus Hydra. Like, if he can kind of step into that role to any degree, then that's got to be where this team finds success. Even a team like Minnesota, like, I mean, there were some people who didn't expect them to be 2-0 after week one. So the fact they are 2-2 after they play teams that on paper, again, most people probably expected C9 and LA Thieves to be Minnesota, regardless of what happened in the first week, and sure, that's what happens here. But that's still just a young team with potential, and they're gonna go through ups and downs with just the ebbs and flows of the season and whatnot. But yeah, and I mean, Miami and Vancouver too. They got some guys. Like, Vancouver's got Abuz in 04 we talked about, Miami with Real, just a couple of guys who were in their first years last year and how they build off of that first year, and where they continue to grow and develop. And we've seen moments very early on this year from those guys. I mean, I just, the one that sticks out to me is Real having a 1.5 last week and losing. So like, again, that's a long-winded way of saying like all of these teams have potential, and it's just it's going to take longer for some teams to figure it out than others. And obviously that's just, that time isn't a luxury that all the teams have. A team like Carolina that starts 4-0, they have that luxury where they, if they go through a struggle, like they have the 4-0 start to fall back on. Whereas a team on the other end of the spectrum like Gentlemates, if they continue to struggle and continue to lose, they don't have that, little buffer from a good start to the season to fall back on if it just keeps going down the path they're on right now. So interesting to see more from all of these teams, really, though, because there's definitely some key pieces and some exciting elements to all the teams, regardless of the results early on in the season.